Hello live hololive players, welcome back to the channel. My name is Camelange and today we're going to be taking a look at the tier list for the Elite Spark expansion for the hololive official card game English edition. Now the tier list we're looking at is actually sourced by HoloArchive. It is a resource maintained by user Chocolat. It's an amazing resource for the community both for tier lists and for deck lists, so link is in the description below. So this isn't my personal tier list, but I will be sharing my thoughts on this, some of the nuance behind what decks are doing well and why. And this is actually based off of the JP meta, so this is going to be slightly different as well. If you're just going to skip to the end of the video and screenshot this or whatever and look at what the top decks are, you're not really going to have the full context. This list is during the post-restriction format in Japan when they unrestricted the Mume first blooms, which we never got that restriction. And this is restricting the second bloom Kanata, so now the debut and second bloom Kanatas are restricted to one copy in this format for JP. But this also most significantly reduces the copies of Tatang to only one. We have yet to get that restriction, or we may never get that restriction in the English edition. There's going to be a lot of factors that I'll cover through. The tier list is still, for the most part, fundamentally the same. It's very similar, but there are some differences because of that. So we'll break those down in detail. I'll tell you my thoughts and my opinions on the best decks and why. So without further ado, let's take a look. We're going to start with D tier, and I'll also preface this by saying that some decks just don't change that much from set 2 going into set 3. So I'm not going to spend time talking about every single deck that's shown here. If you're curious about any of these I don't mention, I most likely cover it in my previous tier list video. So unless there's something noteworthy to bring up, I'm not going to spend too much time on it. For example, in D tier, we see Noelle and Kobo. That doesn't really change much. My only caveat that I always say when I talk about Kobo is that Kobo as an hOCG is fantastic because she works extremely well with Reine, but a solo mono Kobo deck, she unfortunately just doesn't have the sauce. So don't just look at this and be like, oh, Kobo hOCG, she's not good. No, Kobo hOCG is amazing. Just Kobo as a singular holomem that you're trying to build around, not so much. We also have Choco here from the previous expansion. We've got Noelle, and then the two new faces are Hajime and Flare. These are two of the 3 start decks that were released with Elite Spark. Unfortunately, just not very strong. Hajime's effects kind of work around buffing your debuts, which is kind of weird. And Flare just doesn't hit super hard. She is very tanky, and she can stay on the board for a long time, but she's also only a 5-life hOCG. Flare is justifiably in D tier along with Hajime, unfortunately. What's interesting though is that this set does bring about Yellow Cheer. It's a new color in this expansion, so Flare is the first yellow holomem that we're going to be taking a look at here. But other than that, you really just buy her start deck for the Yellow Cheer so that you have 20 to play other yellow decks. Looking at C tier, we have the Bao Bao, so Fuwawa and Mokoko. Unfortunately, as much as they are loved, they're not the strongest. They're not terrible per se. They can do some cool stuff. They have some interesting synergy together, as you would expect. Mokoko being red cheer, Fuwawa being blue cheer, and their hOCG is the both of them together. So they can power each other up and they can search for certain things, but if you get the right hand, turn 1, turn 2, they can be really good, but then they immediately just kind of fall off. They don't really have a long game plan, and they're just not doing enough damage fast enough. Like the Mokoko first buzz just doesn't hit very hard, so it's just not bringing enough to the table at the moment, unfortunately. It's still a fun deck to play. It's really kind of clever mechanic using both of them together, but you know, you're also fishing for 2 different cheers the whole time, so it can be a little awkward, and it's just not the most consistent. We have Ollie, no major changes there. Mio, again, no major changes. Aki is here. So Aki is an hOCG, you're still not really seeing a lot. We'll talk a little bit about Aki again later when we get into B tier. A little surprise for you there. But otherwise, Aki as a archetype doesn't really change. Same goes for Mori, who is still in C tier. You can play her with Kiara, which can be a really fun variant of the deck, but Kiara is just so good on her own that it just doesn't make that much sense outside of just doing it for fun. And the 2 new faces we have in this tier are Luna and Risu. Starting with Luna, she is a white cheer deck. She relies a lot on her Lune Knight's fan card. When that fan is attached to her and you get hit, you can remove that Lune Knight's and then you take less damage as a result. I think it's minus 30. So she can be kind of tanky in that regard where she's taking hits and it's hard to get rid of her. Her second bloom though is only 180 HP base to begin with, so it is a bit weird. It's not like a Reine situation where her second bloom is already 190 and then you're adding to tank for plus 30 HP. Leaves a little bit to be desired, but she does move pretty quick, which is fun about her because she has lots of ways to bring Lunites out very quickly. And for 3 cheer, her second bloom does 150 when Lunites is attached. So decent damage. You're not doing anything crazy. She hits purple for weakness, so you could be doing 200 depending on what holomem you're up against, but that's very matchup dependent, and we're going to see that purple decks aren't at the tippity top of the tier list really, so it's not adding a huge benefit, unfortunately. But Luna's a pretty fun deck, and I could see in the future, depending on what support comes out around her, she could do some interesting stuff. Early game, her hOCG skill is kind of cool because she can just search for any PC card, so if you're missing something, you can search for an amazing PC and then get that right away and find your second bloom, things like that. So there's some stuff going on there, but just when it comes to the other decks, she just falls a bit short. Same can be said for Risu. She has a very similar game plan to Reine in a way, where she relies on having different colored cheers attached to her, and she gets boosts on her arts from that. Her second bloom gets plus 50 when there's a green cheer, and then another plus 50 if there's a blue cheer attached to her. So you're basically trying to get all those different colored cheer on her, and she's just not hitting as hard as Reine. She's not tanking as much as Reine does. She does have synergy with Kobo like Reine. She has interesting ways to ramp cheer pretty quickly and move cheer around the board. So I think that kind of justifies her being towards the top of C tier. I can maybe even see her being low B tier depending, but she's just not as consistent, again, as other decks. She hits blue for weakness, which can be good into the Suisse matchup, but ultimately she is not going to be up there with the best of the best. Her hOCG skills also leave a lot to be desired in my opinion. Her standard one, whenever your holomem is down, you just spend 2 holo power to draw 1 card, which seems really strange to me. Maybe if you drew 2 or 3 cards off of that, that could make her really good, but 2 holo power, so essentially you're archiving 2 cards from your deck to draw 1. You could just play Notica, draw 3 cards, and not lose any cards. You don't have to archive anything, so it just seems a bit weird as a 2-cost holo power for her hOCG skill for that to be all that she offers. I wish they would have made it a little stronger. And her special hOCG skill gives all Risu on the stage arts plus 50, which is pretty good. Plus 50 can make a difference, and it's all of them, so the center and collab position are going to get plus 50 for a turn. But again, it's only 1 turn, so I just think in the pace of a match, there's just other decks that do similar things to Risu, but do it better. Looking at B tier, we have Watame. Watame being another yellow cheer holomem that debuts in this set, along with Risu and Flare. Watame, I think, has decent potential, actually. I don't think she's bad. She's kind of right. I mean, her being in B tier, I think, makes sense. She's kind of right down the middle, but she can be surprising. She, in theory, can do a lot of damage because her second bloom, when she has 6 cheers attached, does an extra 100 arts. And then during the performance step after she attacks, it also gives your collab holomem a plus 100. So it's insanely strong, but you have to get 6 cheer on her to do that, and that's a whole lot of cheer. And without 6 cheer, she's only doing base 80. So base 80 for 3 cheer on a second bloom, not great. And she is 200 HP, so that helps. It kind of helps keep her on the board a little bit longer. And she does hit blue for weakness, so Suisse we're going to be talking about a lot later. So that is decent. She's going to be doing 130 into Suisse base without the extra ability, but it's just not incredible. And, you know, she does have some cool ways to recycle cheer with her gift effect on the second bloom. She has a first bloom that forces your opponent to play rock, paper, scissors, which is pretty awesome. That's probably the best thing about the Watame deck. But otherwise, just kind of a slow deck and a bit inconsistent. She does have a special hOCG skill that lets you, once per game, attach 2 cheer from the top of your cheer deck. So there are ways to ramp and try to get to that 6 cheer count that you need, but it's just a lot, and you're not going to really be able to do it more than once per game. If you could practically get at least 2 second bloom set up with that effect, she'd be incredibly good, but it's just really difficult. Louis doesn't change much here. She has good synergy with Chloe still. Ayame doesn't change that much, but we do have the introduction of Toa here. She is a purple hOCG. Toa, I think, is a bit of a wild card because she plays pretty well into the top decks. She doesn't really get hit for weakness, And her special Oshi skill is kind of crazy. So for 2 Holo Power once per game, you can return 2 cheers from your opponent's collab or center Holomem back to the bottom of their cheer deck in any order. And that's nuts. Granted, it's once per game, but the value of 2 cheer is obviously very important in this game, especially for some of these decks that have higher cheer costs for their attacks. Watame, who really wants 6 cheer. It's kind of nuts. So she can be really disruptive, and that can mess up your game plan pretty badly. So you have to be really cautious of that and how you distribute your cheer. You probably don't want to be collabing often because then it gives her multiple targets, or you might want to collab so that maybe you can kind of bait them into not taking 2 off the same center Holomem. So there's a lot going on there. It does unfortunately have the prerequisite where one of your Toa have to get down before you can use that effect. So as the opponent, you can kind of be wary of, okay, if I'm going to down this Toa, they have 2 Holo Power, they might get rid of my cheer, and they can kind of start to think ahead about how they may want to redistribute their cheer, how they want to ramp the following turn, things like that. But it's still really good. And her Oshi skill itself is decent, at least. For 2 Holo Power, you get arts plus 20 to all your singing Holomem. She is a hashtag singing Holomem, so that's a pretty decent buff. It's not incredible, but you can use it multiple times per game. And if you have a center and collab position, that's plus 40 for the turn. And that can definitely be enough to get you past some hurdles of those higher HP Holomem. So all in all, I think Toa is pretty solid. You can also spread special damage pretty well. So her second bloom has these additional abilities on her arts where you're able to add special damage to your opponent's center or collab position Holomem. And she hits yellow for weakness. So yellow isn't a super dominant archetype in this set, but there are some yellow decks out there that you may run into. We'll talk about one of them a little later that's fairly prominent, but it's nice to have. But I think she would be much better if she hit something other than yellow for weakness. If she hit red or blue, that would be really, really useful for her. But as it is in this format, just not offering a ton, unfortunately. We have Botan here. Botan is also new Oshi in this set. She is a green cheer Oshi, but I would honestly put her lower here. I've seen a few Botan players. I've seen them even play in entry cups where the format is much more limited on what you can play. And even then, Botan just feels pretty inconsistent. She doesn't do anything super overwhelming. So she has ways to ramp cheer pretty easily, which is great. It's only to the back Holomem though, so you have to be strategic about which Holomem you're bringing up and collabing with, because you can only put those cheers on the back most of the time. And she does have synergy with Aki, who I mentioned earlier that we were going to revisit, so there you go. You're going to run Stone Axe in this deck, and if you run Aki with Botan, you're going to get the additional draw support from Stone Axe, and you're going to get the cheer ramp from Botan. So there's some decent stuff she's doing, but it's just not terribly strong, and she really only kind of synergizes with herself for her Oshi. It's all kind of revolving around her, so there's not a lot of other cards besides Aki that I think makes sense to run with her. What is helpful though by running Aki is that Botan's special Oshi skill applies to green Holomem, not just Botan. So once per game for 2 Holo Power, if your center Holomem is green, deal 100 special damage to your opponent's center Holomem other than their debut. So 100 damage is huge. That could be a game changer, but I just don't think it is a significant difference in the game that pushes her to be much higher. I think Toa is probably a little bit more consistent than Botan, so I wouldn't put her much lower, but I think this would be a little high for her personally. We have Okayu. Okayu is from previous start decks, but you know, she works with Suisei, so that helps her out. Fubuki doesn't really change much. Zeta Muna First Buzz doesn't really change. Shion doesn't really change much. hOCG gets some interesting new tech where you can run Roboco with her. Roboco is a new purple Holomem added to the set, and she is Gen 0 along with hOCG. So Roboco First Bloom can help you search for your hOCG cards or for other Roboco. So it helps add some consistency to the deck. The thing about hOCG though is I don't think consistency is a problem. In fact, when I was playing hOCG, she's probably one of the most consistent decks I've ever played. She's very good at her game plan. It's just not particularly overwhelming. And I think the addition of Roboco definitely helps, and it adds kind of a nice variant to her game plan. She doesn't have to just do the same things, but it's not a dramatic enough change to bump her up higher than B tier. But definitely a fun deck with the Roboco addition. And she does have her second blooms that give you variety and what you want to hit for weakness. specifically the one that hits blue for weakness, is really valuable in this meta. So I think she's interesting, but heavily relying on cheer. So Toa can mess with her game plan. Xion can still absolutely destroy hOCG. Even though you're not going to see a lot of either of those two, it's still something to keep in mind. It's something that you're probably not going to see a whole lot of. And then lastly for B tier, we have Iroha. Iroha is one of the start decks that was added in Elite Spark, and hands down the best start deck added in the game. So Iroha is just really good. Specifically, the card you're going to hear a lot about is her first bloom that has the ability Bodyguard. When you collab with that Iroha, as long as that Iroha is in the collab position, your opponent can only target that card. So if you have a center Holomem that you're trying to protect, that you want to get more cheer on, you want to just, you know, not have it lose HP that turn. Maybe it's really low HP and you don't want to get knocked out. You just put up a Bodyguard, and there are ways to work around it. Your opponent can knock out the Bodyguard Iroha first, then go for your center, but it's still a pain. And if they don't have the resources to be able to attack both Holomem, it's going to be very difficult to deal with, and it's very unlikely that they could get a double KO unless it's already pretty late in the game and they have a ton of resources built up. That card alone, it makes her so good, but she also has a lot of great tools at her disposal that increase her arts, increase her HP. So Iroha, definitely busted in the start deck format. Just overall, solidly average in the total meta. If you wanted to get into the game in Elite Spark and you don't want to spend a ton of money, you could just buy 2 Iroha start decks, put them together, and you would honestly have at least like one of the best decks, sort of, right? Like right down the middle, a little bit better than average. So definitely a good investment for players who just want to play. And if you like Iroha, I think there's definitely things that she can do. But again, just doesn't keep up with the best of the best. Looking at A tier, this is where things get a little spicier. So we're going to look at Korone. She is a yellow cheer Oshi. She has 6 life. She is newly introduced in Elite Spark, and I think she actually should be a little bit higher here. I would probably put her above Miko, maybe even Pekora. I think what makes Korone so interesting in this format is that one of the things we're going to be talking about a little bit later is that there are essentially 3 decks that dominate this meta, and people call it the rock, paper, scissors meta, where, you know, deck 1 beats deck 2, deck 2 beats deck 3, deck 3 beats deck 1. So Korone is a pretty strong Oshi who plays right outside of that circle of rock, paper, scissors, where she doesn't get hit for weakness by any of them, and she doesn't really have that problem. She's also very tanky, so it's hard to knock her out early, and not just the 6 life too. Like, her Holomem themselves are very tanky. She has a first bloom that has 200 HP, which is absolutely insane. So she's just very beefy. She's been working out, and I think she can keep up pretty well. But her biggest issue is that she's just not very consistent. She's super reliant on getting her second bloom out. She really needs it, but you can only run 4 second bloom in your deck, and the only ways that you really have to search for that in this game are Amazing PC, and that is a limited card that you also can't search, and you need to spend a cheer to do it. Cheer isn't really a problem for her, fortunately. I think that's one of the saving graces of playing mono Korone, is that she ramps for herself pretty well. She has the first bloom, which is the boxing glove Korone, where for 2 cheer, when she attacks an opponent, you can send the top card of your cheer deck to one of your #gamers Holomem. So that's a really great way to ramp. She has the Futo Inu mascot that when it's attached to a Korone and you collab, you can bring back a yellow cheer from the archive and attach it to that Holomem. Disregard what the text on the card says, it's wrong. It says to your Holomem, it's supposed to be this Holomem. So not as strong as it looks, but it's still very good. But she just has no way to search for herself or her own cards, really. And that's her biggest downfall. You basically want to run a lot of Manager and Notica and just anything that draws. You could also run Gamers, not a lot of people do. I think it helps her. But yeah, if you just don't get the second bloom out early enough or you can't find it, she bricks very quickly. You do have some time because of her tankiness. She has the 6 life. She has some really great Oshi skills. So for 2 holo power, you can unrest one of your Holomem, which is awesome. So you can basically just collab with one Holomem next turn, collab with it again if you want to or need to. You can also use her special Oshi skill once per game for 3 holo power, that when your Korone is down, you can keep one of the Korone from that stack of Korone, add it back to your hand, and you can also redistribute one of the cheer that was attached to that Korone and attach it to another Holomem. And on top of that, the second bloom's gift ability is that you just get to attach a cheer from the top of your cheer deck to your Corone Holomem, which is incredible. So when she gets downed and you use the special Oshi skill, you can essentially get 3 cheer and attach them wherever you want, plus the cheer that you're going to get when your turn starts. So it's very, very good. I think she is a very solid deck in this format. She's just, again, unfortunately, a bit inconsistent, not the most reliable, and she just isn't the top of the top. So I think an interesting off-meta deck for sure. I would put her a little higher, but that's my opinion. Mume Promise, not a lot of major changes there. We have Sora, who actually gets a bit of a buff because of the Roboco edition. So like hOCG, they are both Gen 0, and Roboco just adds a bit more ways to search for your Sora. It also gives you another option to attack. Roboco has an ability on her second bloom that when your opponent has 7 cheer on the board, she gets a huge arts buff. I think it's like plus 80 and her base attack is 70. So that's pretty interesting. And just having that extra engine with Sora helps a lot, especially since Sora is kind of RNG dependent. You can have a bit of a more reliable attacker, but it is dependent on how many cheers your opponent is getting on the board. And I think it's definitely a strong deck. It's a solid deck, but I would put it a little lower. I would again put Corone over these decks. Miko is a really fun deck. She is another new Oshi introduced in this set. She is red cheer, and I think the only reason that she's not higher is honestly just because she's a red deck. I think red decks have a tough time in this format because they get hit for weakness by Suisei. The only red deck that really is the exception to this is Kiara. We'll talk about that. But Miko's really good. She works around her fan card 35p, and she gets different abilities based on if 35p is attached to her. 35p acts as a extra cheer for her, so it gives you that ramp that you need. Your opponent gets to draw a card if you knock her out though while she has it attached, so that's kind of funny. She's able to do a lot of damage and ramp pretty quickly, so I think she's a very consistent deck. She's a very fun deck to play. She has a lot of dice rolling going on that lets you either draw cards or add 35p back to hand, like random stuff like that. So it's kind of silly too, but all of them, for the most part, will give you some kind of buff. I don't think there's many situations where you roll a die and you don't at least get something off of it. And her special Oshi skill is essentially a Mane-chan, where if your center Holomem is red, you choose any number of your cards in your hand to return to the bottom of the deck in any order, then draw cards until your hand has 5 cards. So it's just a better Mane-chan because you don't have to get rid of your entire hand. If there's cards that you want to keep and others that you don't, you can keep them in hand and just get rid of the ones you don't want. You also don't have to shuffle your deck, so the cards that are going to the bottom, you're not going to be redrawing again. And you can fill your hand back up with more cards, so if you only keep 1 in your hand or something, you can draw 4 and get rid of the others that were in your hand. She unfortunately hits green for weakness with her second bloom, which I think isn't super relevant, but it is great against Reine. Reine is a green Holomem, but as we know, she also runs usually Marine or Zeta or something else. I think it's better than a lot of the other colors that she'd be hitting for weakness, so there's value to it. And you can pretty much play her on her own. She ramps herself pretty well. She just does a lot of stuff with 35p and doesn't really need many other Holomem to support her. So you can run Mono Sakura Miko and be just fine. Now, Pecora being here is very interesting. She does get a new card in this set. She gets a first buzz that has 230 HP, which is very tanky. And for 3 cheer, she has an attack that's 80 base damage. And if a die was rolled once or more by the ability of your Pecora, this turn, this arts gets plus 40. So she does a lot of dice rolling with her Holomem ability, so you can be easily doing 120 for 3 cheer, which is really good for a buzz card. Also, she has a collab effect where you may roll die once. If it's even, reveal 1 fan from your deck and add to hand, then shuffle the deck. So there's quite a bit going on with this first buzz that makes Pecora much more consistent. She's still heavily a gambling deck, so sometimes she just bricks or doesn't do enough damage, but her with her second bloom, you can potentially do tons of damage with her, and you have a bit more of a reliable setup with this first buzz that's going to be able to pretty consistently do 120 while also being 230 is going to be kind of hard to knock out. So that definitely helps. You can honestly play Mono Pecora now because of that card, which is pretty cool. I think if you're a fan of her, it's definitely a fun deck to play and one to check out. Just know that even with this edition, it is heavily a gambling deck, and you're going to be taking those risks. We have Polka here. Honestly, she doesn't really change much in this set. She's still good from the previous set. but I don't really see people play her in this format. I think if you're playing red, it's just because most people are going to be playing Kiara, so maybe that's why you don't see her as much. In theory, I could see her being high in the tier list. It's just hard for me to say my opinion on it, because I think if you're not playing Kiara, you're probably not playing a red deck. So it's the one that I don't have a lot of experience with and seeing in this format. Same goes for Chloe. Chloe doesn't really change too much either, but she's blue cheer, so at least she's not a red deck. And she's very difficult to pilot, so you don't see a lot of people playing her, at least from what I've seen. But she's still very good if you play her well. I think both of these decks, you don't see a dramatic change in Elite Spark. Jumping to A+ tier, we're going to be seeing our Reines again. We have two different Reine builds in A+ tier. We have Eofi and Zeta. I talked about Reine plenty in my previous video, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. But I will say that in this set, the thing that makes her different is that in English, we don't have Tatang restrictions, as I mentioned before. So she's still extremely good. And she gets the addition of yellow cheer, which makes her even stronger because now you have another color that you can add to your roster of cheer colors, and she gets stronger for every different color cheer attached. So she essentially just gets buffed with this set. I think the other decks that are in the top tiers are also really good, so it kind of, in that sense, balances her out. Like I said, there's a bit of that rock, paper, scissors dynamic on which top deck you want to play. But yeah, Reine getting really lucky not getting the Banhammer in the English edition on the Tatang, and that addition of yellow cheer is huge. We have Mono Marine here. I love playing Marine. I played her in set 2. I personally think Mono Marine should be lower. I may just be piloting her wrong, but again, I just feel red cheer outside of Kiara in this format just lose really badly to Suisse, and Marine particularly loses really badly to Suisse in my opinion. And Suisse is going to be very rampant. You can see her towards the top of A+ tier. I just don't think she keeps up as well. We don't get cards in Elite Spark that really change anything for Marine, so you're essentially playing the same deck. You can run Kotsumachi, but that's it, and everyone has access to that, so that's not unique to her. I think Marine's a lot of fun. I love that deck, and I still have it built, but I just haven't been competing with it because if I run into a Suisse, which happens a lot, it just feels bad. So that's my take on it, but I would love to get other people's thoughts if you think Marine belongs in A+. Okay, now we can finally talk about Suisse properly. So I would put her higher for sure. I think she would be above Kanata in this format, and possibly even in S tier. But with that said, the reason why Suisse becomes so good in this expansion is that she gets a new First Bloom card that has 150 HP, has a 2 cheer cost attack, and that attack, when you perform your arts, lets you reattach one of the cheers on her and attach it to one of your back Suisse. And as we know, Suisse has a bit of a cheer problem. That's one of the things holding her back, is just constantly needing to rely on cheer that's getting archived. So not only can you attack with that First Bloom, you're able to save a cheer from her and put it somewhere else if she's going to get knocked out next turn, or if you just want to redistribute it. Most importantly about that new First Bloom is her Bloom effect, which lets you look at the top 4, I believe, cards of your deck, and you can add one of the Suisse cards you find there to your hand. So this makes finding her second Bloom so much easier, and that ability actually does stack. So if you do the First Bloom, you find another First Bloom Suisse, and you have the debut on the board, or you can side bloom, you can search again, and you can keep doing it. And every time you do that, you're putting cards at the bottom of the deck. You're not shuffling the whole deck, so your odds of finding the second bloom just keep getting higher. I actually played someone that found all 4 of their First Bloom Suisse in a row, and it was miserable for me. So there's that. And she's just really strong in general. So she's been strong, as we know, this entire time that she's been released. So this card is a huge game changer, and it just makes the deck far more consistent. And she hits red for weakness, which is relevant in the Kiara matchup, and Kiara, we're going to talk about momentarily, is extremely strong. So with all those things going for her, it just makes Suisse an even better deck than she already was. Kanata, even with the restrictions, can be super scary. I don't think I would put her this high, because if you Hollow Power your second bloom or your restricted debut, it is an uphill battle for her. She can compensate by running Explosion Magic and a bunch of cards like that, but otherwise I don't think she changes dramatically in this set either. So my thoughts and opinions from my previous tier list video apply, so I'm not going to spend too much time on Kanata. So let's just jump to S tier and talk about the elephant in the room. Elite Spark is definitely Kiara's time to shine. She is in the spotlight, and she is just incredibly strong in this format. Similar to Suisei, the reason why she gets such a big buff is that they added a new First Bloom card for her. And what that First Bloom does is it lets you archive up to 4 Kiaras from your deck into your archive. So her second bloom is reliant on having a bunch of holomem in the archive. And for each one that you have in the archive, she increases the strength of her arts. And then you have to shuffle 6 holomem back into the deck. So the more you're getting holomem in there, the stronger she is and the more consistent she becomes. So having a card that you can run 4 of that on bloom lets you just put more ammunition where you need it is crazy good. She's super consistent. She hits like a truck. She's doing tons of damage. And she is relatively frail in terms of HP, but it's really not even that bad. And as long as you're getting knockouts, that's really all that matters with Kiara, is you're just going to be going for those big knockouts, and she's just really difficult to deal with. She can set up her board pretty quickly as well. She has KFPs for draw power. She has Katori, which limits the amount of damage being done to her. So she's just kind of nuts. She's just swinging big, doing tons of damage, getting all of her cards in the archive, drawing cards, looking at cards. So if you're a Kiara fan, this is definitely the format for you. I think putting her at this spot makes sense. I would probably make S tier be Kiara, Reine, and Suisei personally. That would be my change here. I don't know what order I put them in, to be honest. I think there's definitely an argument to be had for Kiara being the best deck in format, but Suisei and Reine are pretty darn close. I would say maybe Suisei even more so than Reine Marin. Reine Marin doesn't really change that much, so again, my previous thoughts apply, but we do have the addition of Yellow Cheer and we don't have to tank restrictions, so that's why she is still at the top. With the new First Blooms that Kiara and Suisei get, they are now contenders against Reine for best deck in format, and that's why they are the top 3. They're the big 3 of this format. You got your rock, paper, scissors. Basically, the way it works is that Suisei beats Kiara, Kiara beats Reine, Reine beats Suisei is essentially the idea here. So pick one and hope that your matchup spread is good. But really, all 3 of them just are super good. I think Kiara is probably the most consistent out of all of them, which gives her that #1 spot. And that is my overview of the Elite Spark tier list for the English edition of the game. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Consider hitting that subscribe button and ringing that bell so you don't miss any of my future uploads. And let me know in the comments what you think. Do you agree with my opinion on the tier list? Do you agree with what the top 3 decks are? Is there a deck in here that you think is being underrepresented? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so let me know more, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!
Hi, Cameron.